a session that is a multidisciplinary session in the sense that we're trying to bring different levels of expertise and different understandings of youth travel together. And particularly we're taking a look at the impact and the connection between international education, international students, and youth travel. And we invited today a number of people that are particularly experienced in understanding how cities can attract youth, whether it's from a youth travel perspective or from a research perspective. And we want to share today also some of the best practices that we have seen in cities like Glasgow, Rotterdam, Copenhagen. My goal today of this panel is that we understand the implications of the connection between higher education and youth travel in a framework of opportunity, and that we're looking at what kind of strategies can cities apply to compete in this increasingly growing and international higher education market, and how can they work together with other partners in the city so it creates a stronger and more competitive offer. So I would like to tell very quickly who the panelists are, and they will introduce themselves later on. And after my introduction, I will invite Samuel Vetrak of Student Marketing, a Vienna-based research institute, to also set a little bit the stage of the conversation with some data on youth travel and higher education. Today here, for your side, the right side, is Samuel Vetrak. You will hear more of him. Samuel also is an expert not only on the data, but also on the strategy part of it, and also the impact of higher education and international students in cities. So it will be very interesting to hear that. Rachel Sandison from Glasgow, thank you very much for being here. Here on my left side is Emil Spangenberg from wonderful Copenhagen. To his left is Kim Heinen from Rotterdam Partners. And last but not least, Karl Wöber from Vienna. As I said, the interesting connection between higher education, in particular international students, and youth travel is something that is not often explored by cities. So on one hand, you have universities that are increasingly trying to get international students to come to their cities. And on the other hand, you have destination marketing groups, such as a tourism board, that is trying to attract tourists, or youth travelers sometimes in particular. And those two are actually not always working together. And it's interesting because if you come to think of your own family situation or your own personal choices that you made, you will find that very often the choice of the city where you are going to study is connected to a travel experience. Whether you went one day to Madrid or to Sevilla and you thought this would be an amazing place to learn Spanish. That kind of small connections can already be identified in most individual study decisions. But as soon as someone has made that decision, it's very interesting what happens then. Because if people go abroad to study, you often generate a lot of traffic, so to say, as a result of that. The parents are coming to visit, your friends see it as a great opportunity to go for a weekend to Madrid. So you understand immediately what kind of impact higher education and international students can have on a larger tourism base in that city. So that's what we're trying to explore, but also push it a little further and look at how cities are actually capitalizing on these connections and where they see this kind of trend starting to be successful. I wanted to start inviting Samuel to give you a little bit of background also in the statistics and the significance of this growing industry, and particularly pay attention to new things that we would like to explore today in the conversation. Samuel?
Good afternoon. As you probably can recognize my picture, I'm Samuel, and I am supposed to deliver some data and clarity of the international higher education mobility and its contribution. So what are we talking about here? But I'll start with a story to get your attention. When I was studying at the university back in 1990s and decided to go and study abroad in America for some time, I felt like a hero because I was one of probably 1,000 people that I know that go and study abroad. My son is 13 and he's already studied at 4 different locations as an elementary school student. And I think that as you will see, the numbers will show that young people study at different locations outside of their home base. And not only they go and study abroad once, but they study at multiple destinations in the course of their studies at the elementary, high school, or higher education level. Today, we will be talking mostly about higher education and what is the mobility. So, higher education, we're talking about now 4.5 million international students. So students who are internationally mobile, either for long-term degree-seeking programs at the undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate level, or short-term exchange students like Erasmus students or US study abroad. It has its momentum now, and it's growing under an angle of 5% annually, faster than any other international mobility. The market value is 82 billion US dollars. That's the global direct economic impact. And we anticipate, or the industry anticipates, 6 million international students by 2020. So 1.5 million new students per annum in just 5 years from now. Most of the destinations have already spotted the opportunity they may have from receiving more international students, and we will be talking about them a little bit later. But as you can see, our team has prepared 10 destinations over here to feature what's the chase for more students. So Australia is the best example, and they're going now even more from 660,000 international students up to 1 million by 2025. China announced their goal to go for 500,000. Canada wants to double the numbers, up to 450 by 2022. So is Germany. They also want more international students, and so on. As you can see, there is a global competition for more international students, and it's not necessarily to stimulate the new demand, but to capture the existing demand that is already there. This is driven by 2 major factors. One is there is a decrease in domestic demographic, so there is less and less students in their local economies, so they need more international students from abroad. And second, there is a global demand for international education, as education of your preference might not necessarily be available where you live, so you move internationally and you study that major or subject somewhere else. Either it is students coming from Vietnam to UK, or Chinese students studying in Germany, but it's the ability to study in English in destinations drives the possibility to study abroad. So how can destinations benefit from influx of international students to their destinations? As you can see on the screen, there are 2 parts, present and the future. When there are international students in the city, they create a very special social fabric, an atmosphere. You can feel that, be it Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Berlin, or Prague, when the international students are there during the course of school year, there is a different atmosphere than in summer when they are not there. And that's the difference. Difficult to describe, difficult to put in a box. but the atmosphere and social fabric is rather different when the international students are in the city. It's a contribution to local economy as well, in a way that it creates, when we take this, let's say this is an example from a student city that has 26,000 international students. It creates 6,000 jobs and 434 million direct and indirect economic impact, just that small cohort of 26,000 students. And it creates jobs for academia, for universities, for City Hall, and for partially for the local communities. That's just the benefit for the present, which is quite significant, but nothing when you compare it to the future benefits for the city. So the same students that are studying, let's say, in Berlin, generate additional VFR, visitors, visiting friends and relatives arrivals, in an annual worth 16.6 million euros. Then repeated visits of the same students that come and return to the destination again, 9 million euros. But most importantly for the destination, these international students, 35% in average across European cities, want to stay in that destination as citizens. So they studied in Barcelona or Lyon, and they desire to stay there, which creates an influx of talented, educated people, inhabitants, and citizens as taxpayers for the cities that actually experience a demographic decrease across Europe. So it's an elegant way to keep or increase the talent in the city, as well as to have strong social and economic impact. Now we can see some proportions of international students out of all total population of the city, and we can see some 15 cities over here. So we have the ratio international students to total population, and we can see what's the level of internationalization of particular city. So we can see that Zurich, Paris, and Dublin are the top three, so they do the best, followed by Vienna, Glasgow, and Copenhagen. And they create a good stream of international students for their future because, as we said, 35% will stay over. Some other student cities, like London or Berlin, that we might thought that this is quite significant, that so many international students are here, but when we compare it to overall population, it's not so strong. This is additional comparison. So overall number of students to number of international students to overall number of students only, not the total population. And this changes the map, and London becomes number one. And we can see some 28% of all students in London are international students, followed by Vienna, Paris, Zurich, and Dublin. And we can see the other order on the screen. But some of the cities are doing rather better than others. The European average is 14%. So the Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities, so capitals and other major EU cities, have the ratio of international students to all students 14%. Over here we have examples of Vienna, Glasgow, Copenhagen, and Rotterdam, quite intentionally because of our panelists, so that we give you some idea about how their cities are doing. So Vienna, as the leader of number of international students, the ratio is 26%, so we have 48,000 international students to 187 overall. Glasgow is doing quite well, but not as well as the European average, so this is 12%. Copenhagen, the ratio is 9%, so close to 14,000 international students to 150,000 overall. And Rotterdam, 650,000 to 58,000, so 11% ratio. So we have second to last of my slides. This is the potential of university cities. I have featured what's the benefit of an international student cohort in the city. Now, how can you capture it? How can you tap to this potential? If you are a destination or a policymaker, what can you do? Well, from the experience of the cities that we help to tap to this potential, they usually start with some market intelligence and strategic plan, how to get there, because it depends what markets or source markets or nationalities you want to attract. Then you need to develop the content. So you need to have quite good educational institutions, accommodation, some kind of incubators to practice the theory that people learn in the class. And then you package it up to scholarships or partnerships that you build. And then you go out. So this can be distributed through the student fairs like this, B2B workshops, so you work with educational agencies to tell them about you as a destination. An example might be either London or Den Haag or other city destinations that promote themselves at the B2B workshops. Then you can do the sales trips, so you can basically travel to individual source markets like with Vietnam or Turkey or Czech Republic, whatever, and promote through the educational agencies your particular destination. You can, many destinations organize trade missions, so group of educational institutions travel to the source market to make some waves, to make some visibility to media, to local stakeholders, to politicians, and the local educational agencies. Or the other way around, FAM tours, familiarization tours. So you invite the source market individual stakeholders to come to your destination, say Holland, and you show them what's the institutions and other offer that can be there. And then there is an online marketing and mobile marketing, so your presence in this space, which is usually used much more as a branding and marketing than trying to generate some bookings, so you increase the profile of a destination, be it country or city. So there are multiple B2B and B2C channels, sometimes even B2G, so business to government, so the governments sign a bilateral agreement to open doors for the mobility of students from one country to another. So thank you very much. I hope I provided some initial food for thoughts and conversation during this panel.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Samuel and I have been working together on, as part of the class of 2020, and this platform that we founded a couple of years ago was basically a network of people that were working on student marketing or student recruitment, internationalization. And it's been incredible how much data we've been able to get together and start to see what the connections are. But as I said in the introduction, today it's also about actually going into the city's experiences. And Samuel, you already provided a lot of data on the 4 cities that are here. I'm not going to do a quiz, but probably most of you know that there are 2 capital cities in this panel and 2 cities that are not capital cities. But as you could see in the data, they're quite significant university cities. So I think it's also interesting to keep that in mind, how you position your city in the market for youth tourism, for international education, and how do you determine then your USPs. The slides will determine the start of the order of the panel, and Kim, as you probably saw, it's in Rotterdam going first. Maybe you can introduce yourself, what you do, in particular in relationship to this topic, and also give a start about how you understand what your city is doing in terms of relationship with international education and youth travel.
My name is Kim Heinen. I'm the International Press Officer of Rotterdam Partners, the City Marketing Office. I've been working there for 5 years, and I moved to Rotterdam 15 years ago as a student. I grew up in the rural parts of Holland, so although I wasn't an international student, I think for some locals, they did see me as an international student. I have seen the city developing a lot. When I was still at the university, there were some bars and some cafes, but there wasn't really a need to go downtown. So many students in Rotterdam were staying on the eastern part of the city. As a result, after 6, the city would be vacant, you could say, because nobody was really entertained downtown. Partly due to all the great coverage that we had in Rotterdam over the recent years, including a Lonely Planet nomination, Rough Guides and New York Times topping us as being a place worthy of visiting, aside from Rotterdam, of Amsterdam. We see that we now have become a destination on its own, and this means that we have new potential target audiences, such as international students and youth travel in general. So I'm very happy, because we are a relatively new kid on the block, that this year we're going to organize summer schools in cooperation with the universities, but also with public partners and people behind the student hotel. Because not only the city has changed, also the infrastructure and the accommodation that we have nowadays, it suits the needs of the international students. So this nice combination of now having something to offer and also having this infrastructure, I think for Rotterdam will have great added value to the city that we already are.
Simple question, but do you, in the positioning of the Rotterdam marketing campaigns and the strategy, have you already looked at international student data as probably a source of information or informing your strategy?
Not so much as a separate group, but we try to approach them as youth travelers. So what do youth travelers find attractive in a city? What should be energetic, vibrant? There should be, lots of cultural activities, but it should also be affordable. And if Rotterdam is one thing, it is affordable. So when it comes to accommodation, but also your daily costs, if you compare it to our capital, Amsterdam, which is also a great city, but it's much more expensive, which means that for some students, this is an unattainable city to live in.
And do you travel with the universities, for example, to fairs or the things that Samuel described? Do you collaborate already with the universities in that field?
Yeah, we do give them advice and help them in putting together their promotional materials. Try to tell them how to position the city, so not just being a great university, because the Erasmus University is well known, especially for their business administration. But to really position yourself as a university within Rotterdam, now being a cool destination, and profit from that positive buzz that we have at the moment.
Yeah, it will be very interesting to hear Glasgow's perspective on that as well, because you mentioned the city was historically well known as a port city. A lot of change in the terms of the employment base.
Yes.
Do you also see that the companies and organizations that are in Rotterdam are interested in this young international crowd?
Absolutely, yeah. As you said, rightly so, Rotterdam used to be the biggest port in Europe until the 80s, and we're still one of the biggest in the world. But as we're changing into a new economy, we need new capital, and we need young people that are interested in technical entrepreneurship and innovation. The students are the future. And as a city, a very rapidly developing city, we do need that intellectual capital.
Yeah, great. Well, more later on. Can I have the next slide, please? This was on your Rotterdam School initiative. Can you speak a little bit more about that? Because we started working with you on this, but why was it interesting for Rotterdam partners to get involved, and how does it work exactly?
The summer school program this year will be a first, and as the slide said, this year we hope to attract 300, 500 students, and we're very ambitious, so by 2019 we would like to see it up to 1,000. This is the first time we're going to do it, and we try to stay close to the DNA of the city by providing summer schools that deal around urban planning, architecture, marketing, and by working together with the universities and again with the student hotel. Having this combination of cooperation and a shared interest, although all from a different angle. Fortifying our strengths, hopefully we are able to attract these international students.
Great. Okay. Next slide, please. I'm not going to ask you to guess this because it already gives away on the on the slide where it's from. But beautiful bridge, Rachel. I mean, part of the reason that we're on this panel is because we visited Glasgow last year at one of the largest higher education fairs called the AIA, and we discovered your city and also how much you work together with the marketing, the tourism board, etc. Tell us more about you, what you do, and why you understand that this is an important topic to the Glasgow city.
Thank you, Frank. I'm Rachel Sandison. Hello, everyone. I'm the Director of Marketing, Recruitment and International at the University of Glasgow. But I also wear another hat. I'm the chair of a group which has come together through Glasgow Economic Leadership, which looks at pooling resources from all 8 institutions in Glasgow, so both our higher education institutions and further education colleges. So we can come together with a shared purpose and a number of key objectives about how we develop the city's global profile, how we share expertise and resources to support international student growth, and how we look at how the brand is being transmitted, I guess, to a range of different stakeholders. And in fact, it goes beyond just the student recruitment piece to actually looking at attracting talent to the city, whether that be students, whether it be academics, researchers, businesses. And I think one of the really key aspects of this for us is that we are institutions working together, but we work in complete synergistic partnership with Glasgow City Marketing Bureau. So I think, you know, the equivalent of what Rotterdam has. And that has been hugely, hugely important and advantageous for us. So as a result of that partnership, we have done work together collaboratively during the Commonwealth Games, which was back in 2014 in Glasgow. We worked with Glasgow City Marketing Bureau on bringing the big education conference, EAIE, to Glasgow last year. And we've also done some work also on MTV Music Europe Awards. So they were in Glasgow, obviously targeting a youth demographic. So again, we worked together to try and leverage those key events taking place in the city to promote basically Glasgow as a study hub, as an education hub in the UK and in Europe. And I think there might be a few other slides.
Yeah.
You might...
I'll try. Yeah. Oh,
this is all of us. So this is the different partners engaged. And then this is our shared purpose. So you can see that it's about marketing Glasgow as a premium education destination, pooling resources. Really importantly, we benchmark how we're doing against some of our key competitors. So we've done a lot of work with market research agencies and different stakeholder perception surveys to understand who our competitors are in the UK and how Glasgow benchmark against those. Frank mentioned that Glasgow's had a little bit of a sort of checkered history. So when you think of the UK, you know, we're not Edinburgh, which is the capital city in Scotland, and we're not London, but Glasgow is actually the 3rd largest city in the UK. It's been the European City of Culture. It's a fabulous architectural gem in the UK and a really vibrant cosmopolitan city. But lots of people just simply don't have that perception of Glasgow and think back towards kind of old shipbuilding years where it was perhaps a little bit less savoury, a little bit less safe than it is now. So we're having to work really, really hard in engaging people to think about Glasgow differently. And that's part of the remit of this group as well.
Can we have one slide back, please? Because I think, yeah. Can you this is quite a unique community, but it's also a very large community. Samuel's slide was showing the number of students. If I recall, it was more than 100,000. 130,000. All of them depend also on international students to recruit them. in your daily job, you're busy with recruiting students. How important is it to sell the city and not just the education institution? And how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hugely, hugely important. I mean, we have all done separately and together a whole range of research on motivations that influence decision making. And at undergraduate level particularly, although course choice always ranks number one, the location of the institution ranks so highly in terms of those indicators that influence their decision making. So this is really where working collegiately with our partners in the city makes a big difference, because we are all different universities, we all have our own unique selling points, and we will all find ways of communicating that to our different audiences. But together, really, we just want to be able to promote the benefits of the city as a whole. And it's so much easier and much richer to be able to do that collaboratively as it is for us all to be producing separate collateral about the city or separate digital assets or whatever that might be. So actually, one of the other things that we've done as part of this group is built a kind of study portal, which sits on the Glasgow City Marketing Bureau site, actually. But it becomes like a one-stop shop for students who are thinking about studying in Glasgow. So we've determined that actually the first thing we want to do is just get Glasgow on their radar. And then once they're thinking about Glasgow, once they're keen to come, then we can battle it out as to which institution they come to.
Yeah.
But the key thing for us is actually getting them to think about the city in the first place.
Okay. So I guess we can switch 2 slides now, then.
Yeah, and I mean, this really is just to focus in again on some of
Yeah.
our key shared objectives. I think what's also really important is how we measure those, because we all invest in the group, both in terms of time and energy and resource. So on an annual basis, and the group has only existed for almost 3 years now, but we're constantly having to evaluate against a defined set of KPIs, and that will be around international applications, international inquiries, the number of visitors, international visitors that we have to the campus, web traffic to our study portal. But these are things that will be constantly evolving, and we need to be able to ensure that we can measure them effectively, because every year we want to improve our position.
Yeah, and the first signs are there. I mean, in the statistics, do you see your efforts, your joint efforts paying off?
So, well, interestingly, absolutely. So this year, we all shared our data around admission stats, inquiry stats, and for every single institution, we have all seen an increase. I'm not sure that that's happened before, so I would really like to believe that it's as a result of the consortium that we have and the work that we're doing together. I'm sure there are other factors at play, but the good thing is that for all of us, we feel really pleased by the kind of momentum that's been established, and we're seeing an impact on numbers, which is great.
Great, very well.
Thank you.
Thanks. Next city, Copenhagen. Emil, I'm going to move to the other side. I can see you.
Yes. Well, thank you. I'm Emil from Copenhagen. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communication in the bureau called Wonderful Copenhagen, and we promote the city of Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark, where you've all been, I suppose. Anyone out there? No. All right. So, all right, 1 down there. 2. Perfect. We promote the entire greater region of Copenhagen, and we have a pretty strong relationship to both attracting talent. We're in the same building as the Danish Institute for Study Abroad. We're in the same building and actually share canteen with what we call Copenhagen Capacity, which attract talent and investments to Copenhagen. So we have a close bond and a lot of close strategies. This here is basically the city branding framework that we always work with. We promote 5 key stories in everything we do. We don't use them all at the same time, but these are the 5 that goes through everything, which is, of course, as many others, a design and architect legacy, which is both modern and old. Copenhagen is a very old town. We have a big stronghold on gastronomy. A few people have been lucky enough to be to the restaurant Noma, but what's called the Nordic cuisine and the revolution of Nordic cuisine started in Copenhagen and really revolutionized the entire cuisine scene. So that's a big thing for us. It's a green and very sustainable city, which is tough to market because no one travels for a green city. But it is a very important message for us to get out there. And of course, the history and the tolerance and the openness of the city is very much the pillars of what we do when talking about Copenhagen. So that's the elevator pitch.
And you're in one building together with Study in Denmark. So
Yes, we are.
can you explain, is higher education important to the city of Copenhagen? I mean, is it on the radar, and how does that translate into collaborative actions, if any?
It's very much on the radar, but historically it hasn't been that well knitted together because of just different agendas. But today, and what we've seen of an organic growth of actually great talent in the universities, attracting both teachers and professors, and also, of course, the students, has made the last 5 years, especially, Copenhagen really change. And Copenhagen has really moved into an international league, and you can hear it and you can feel it. You hear more languages, you feel a more international vibe, and that all kind of comes together in a combined experience of the city. Because in my world, when branding cities, the experience is the brand. You can say that you are a lot of things, but if it's something else you meet when you put foot down in the city, it's just off the charts. But so we've been lucky enough to actually attract and have a good balance between tourism and having that atmosphere of being international, because there has been a lot of students as well for longer periods, and that really reflects on the experience of being there. Moving forward, this is definitely an agenda for all the organizations working with this, so I'm very inspired by listening to some of these cases as well.
Okay, great. Copenhagen is a capital city. It's also a city with a big shortage of housing and accommodation in general. Do you see that this increasing internationalization of the education community in Copenhagen and your success as a destination are starting to put pressure on the city? I mean, I refer especially also to a place like Barcelona. In Amsterdam, there is, for example, a lot of...
Yes, it's definitely something that we started the conversation about pressure. It's not a conversation that we're having with the hotels. It's a conversation we're having with different stakeholders, because we've seen a great growth in numbers for the last years. We're not at Barcelona. We don't have the problems that we've seen and heard in different cases of tourism pressure. But definitely now our job is also to fold out the entire agenda of tourism and visitors, to get even more people to understand how important it is, but also how we can spread it even more and think about it in different terms than just the ones doing everything on the bucket list and walking down the beaten path. That's our job, but we need more people to understand the agenda and move forward. In terms of housing, yes, Copenhagen is very dense, and we don't have a lot of space to build new houses and build new housing for students. It's very much, luckily, a political agenda, and it's very high. And the mayor of Copenhagen and the entire political system in Copenhagen works really hard to both be creative in terms of turning old houses and old people housing into, which has very, very nice locations in the city, actually turn them into student apartments and student housing, and also build brand new stuff in some of the highly new development areas where the politicians make sure that it's not just all sold for the highest price, but they actually make sure that they are going to be accommodated houses for students and for lower prices.
Great. Samuel, you've been listening before we going to Vienna. Any things that stand out, or things that you see also happening in cities that are not here represented, that you think are interesting, related to the data set you presented?
I would probably start with something that I heard from Glasgow, that it's building content first. So the education institutions need to be there. Then building the synergy effect, that the group is able to do more than an individual. We're talking about international marketing. We're talking about many countries to be present in. And one institution can spend all the marketing dollars pretty fast, but if the budget is joined, if the ideas are joined, if the experience is joined, you don't do so many mistakes, you don't necessarily need to spend so much time, effort and money to achieve the same. So I'm actually very pleased to hear that there are already numbers to support it, that all the institutions have more. So this is what the other cities are doing. So they're trying to, for example, put a scholarship together. So I use non-European destination, Australia, so they create campaigns like the best job in the world, for example, not necessarily related to study, but this is the viral social media campaign to attract the audience the way they are able to read it. So these kind of things that highlight and stress and underline the content need to be there before they go with the marketing campaign out. So this is what the other cities usually do and succeed with.
Great. Professor Karl, you're the only professor I'm allowed to dutzen here in Germany, but I asked permission for that. You're professor, but also you have different hats as well. And you come from a city where internationalization of education is not necessarily the most desirable objective at the moment. Tell us more about yourself and what the city of Vienna is doing.
Thank you very much and welcome everybody in the audience. I'm not a destination management professional, I have to say. I'm representing a university, MODUL University Vienna, which is a private university based in Vienna with about 600 students. Very international. We teach in English only. We have 70% international students from 70 different countries. As a matter of fact, I think at least 10 or 15 of them are sitting here in the audience. Maybe you can raise your hands. Yes, yeah, okay. So I think they alone represent 10 different countries here. Yeah? I would estimate approximately, just to give you an idea. I'm also the chairman of the private university conference, so basically talking with the government regularly about the strategy of universities and private universities in particular in Austria. And I'm also in the strategic advisory board of European Cities Marketing and the Vienna Tourism Board. And actually the Vienna Tourism Board asked me to come here and to speak for the Vienna Tourism Board. And I have to be honest and quite frank, it's also because they don't see universities as their priority in their strategic plan. And that's quite opposite of what the other cities have been presenting here before. And let me start my little intervention by commenting a little bit about the statistics Samuel has presented to us before. And if you look at the statistics and you see Vienna actually always ranked among the top cities in terms of internationalization, you get, a slightly different perspective. You get the impression that Vienna is one of the leading tourism destinations in Europe. We have about 12.2 million overnights at the moment, and we are I think, on the sixth rank in terms of European cities in the overall continent. And if you look at the high quota of international students, you have the feeling that there has been a strategy behind it. So there's a kind of correlation between the success in tourism somehow refers to success of the universities in Austria in a sense. But as a matter of fact, that's not necessarily the case. And those 25% of international students you have mentioned, you have to know that 38% of these international students are German students, and 11% of another proportion, a big proportion of 11% of these students are students from Italy. They're not just from Italy, they are actually from South Tyroleans, So a lot of them speak actually German, and there are people in Austria which perceive them as Austrians, as a matter of fact. So what I want to say, half of these international students are actually not what I would perceive as truly international in a sense, or something which really makes a really diverse mix of international students in Vienna. So why is that the case? Actually, we have in Austria, we have to distinguish between public and private universities. And at public universities, studying in Austria is for free. So everybody who has an A-level degree basically can just go to university. There is no entrance exam until recently. There are no fees. Everybody can study. And as a matter of fact, all our public universities are completely overrun by students. So we have, you said correctly, 187,000 students. And considering that Vienna is that capital is leading as a capital in Europe in terms of student population ratio, in a sense. So it's the number one in this respect. But this comes because of the public university system here, where studying is for free. Yeah? So universities actually avoid having public universities avoid having additional students. So they try everything, not having even more students. Yeah? Then there is also a problem. One medical graduate, for instance, in Austria costs for the government 400,000 euros. So the Austrian government is not in the position actually to subsidize international students coming to Vienna to graduate here and then to go back home and become professional doctors there, based on just on taxes, in a sense. So that really creates a major problem, as a matter of fact. Of course, the scenery is completely different for private universities. Yeah? And in Austria now, the private universities are gaining market share year by year. And here we charge students for studying, we attract students, and we liaison with the tourism offices, in a sense, in order to attract students. So we really have to strongly distinguish between public and private university sector here, which is common use in other countries in the world, not so much in Germany and in Austria, as a matter of fact, because these are really very special in this respect. And that gives a completely different framework in order of collaboration, in order of synergies between the tourism sector and the education sector.
Yeah. But Karl, one of the things that is interesting in your story is that you mentioned the cost of education, especially of free education. And also in the Netherlands, we have a very large proportion of German students. And at some point, there were political questions asked about, are we subsidizing with our tax money German studies? What happened then was that they started studying the impact of them. And I think this is also what Samuel was referring to. The long-term economic impact of those free education programs can be quite significant. Has Austria or Vienna also done that kind of studies?
Yeah.
And what was the outcome?
Yes. Well, of course, there were recently also an impact study, and they calculated the economic contribution of the students in Vienna. I mean, just think about this: 187,000 students plus 32,000 faculty and staff. So there are more than 200,000 people in Vienna compared to an entire population of 1.8 million. That means basically that every 10th person you meet on the street is somehow connected with the university, either as a teacher, a lecturer, or as a student, as a matter of fact. So, of course, the economic impact is huge. And there's also, even within the government, there is a perception of that we need to have international students, even within the public universities. But there is no clear strategy behind that. So the government does not say, for instance, our goal is to have 30% international students, because that's what we can basically pay for. That's what that would be the public contribution to internationalization and so. It's really interesting, and I guess and I hope that in the future there will be a more serious discussion about this and really outlining what are the real goals, what is the vision the government is following here.
Yeah. And I'm sure in the meantime, there are plenty of cities that are more than happy to take your international students. We'll have Karl's email address available if you need some. But in Glasgow, this ratio is probably also very significant. The economic impact of the university industry is very large. And I think Australia was also on the board. Samuel, if I'm correct, it's one of the top 5 industries in Australia, higher education. Do you see in Glasgow that awareness is present within the entire leadership of the city? Or is it difficult? Is it something that you have to advocate as well?
I think that's a very interesting question. I think in Scotland there's a real appreciation of the revenue generated by higher education institutions. I mean, education is a significant export for Scotland. We actually have just undertaken an economic study at the University of Glasgow, which shows our economic contribution to GDP within Scotland and in the UK, and it is really, really significant. So I think within the Scottish Government, there is actually a real understanding and appreciation of the value of higher education. We have a slightly kind of bizarre setup, though, with the UK government still has power over immigration rules and legislation within the UK. So what we are saying is that there is slightly different rhetoric between the Scottish Government and the Westminster Government based in London. Yeah. And some of the changes that the UK Government has made to legislation has meant that we've seen big drops in some of our key priority overseas markets, like South Asia, for instance, because the opportunity to stay and study after graduation has now been removed. There's not a post-study work visa anymore in the UK. So this causes us real issues because Scotland absolutely want to be able to retain talent. So if we're bringing international students in and they may be spending 3, 4, 5 years with us, we want to keep them. You know, we want them to be able to have jobs in the local economy. But actually that's simply not feasible as it currently stands because of UK legislation. So it's a tricky space for us.
Yeah. We have a couple of more minutes. If there's anyone in the audience that has a question, can you please come to the front here and then I'll give you a microphone. Or if you have questions later, I'm sure the panelists will be standing around for a bit, so you can ask them then. But if you have a question, please come now, so we can still incorporate that in the conversation. But Karl, you have one topic because after this, I wanted to go into one question also, like how do you leverage this chain? Because if you have so many international students, have some of the cities already started exploring, for example, engagement of international students for marketing, destination marketing, for parents, for friends and family, etc. But you had a remark.
I wanted to comment on your question concerning economic impact, and I want to share with you some information because Vienna is regularly ranked as the #1 congress and convention city in the world. Sometimes number 2, Paris and Vienna matching always the first 2 ranks, and there has been recently a study about where the conference participants come from, and when you look at the universities in Vienna, how much conference participations they generated in 2011, 240,000 conference participation days, which has been really triggered just by the universities. And the most interesting thing is that 65% of these conferences were international conferences, in a sense. And according to the Vienna Convention Bureau, who has been recording in the same year 900,000 conference participation days, that basically means that 27% of all congresses and conventions in Vienna were somehow related to universities or triggered by universities. Yeah. And I think that alone shows the huge economic impact potential universities have.
Yeah. Kim, do you want to take a shot at the question that I just posed on like Rotterdam marketing strategy? Mm-hmm. What do you do with this asset in your city?
An asset indeed. What we see is not so much from our initiative, but from the city's perspective. So the entrepreneurs and the people that are owners of restaurants and bars, but also the public transport system making announcement in English since a year. So people are really embracing the fact that we are an international city. For a long time, our international city was defined by business alone. So nobody really had an eye for international visitors, let alone international students. And now that these numbers are increasing and we're feeling the potential, we want to accommodate them as good as we can and be hospitable. It's very nice to see how everyone in Rotterdam is really embracing this new group. And it could be small things like having English menus, English signage on the street. So people are much more proud of Rotterdam as a result of increasing numbers in tourism. But it's nice to see that the students are also being seen as a very valuable asset. and not just while they are in Rotterdam, but we hope, like in Glasgow, to maintain them in Rotterdam, because this has been a struggle for the city for quite some time. People come to Rotterdam to study and then they leave.
Yeah.
So at the time, I was kind of the exception, that I came to Rotterdam and stayed. But as we are an international business city, we very much encourage these students to stay.
Yeah. Is that also your experience?
We actually, in a connected world, it's important for us that we keep the relations with the people who stayed in Copenhagen. So we established something we called a Youth Goodwill Ambassador Corps. We have a Goodwill Ambassador Corps that's international. It's usually older Danes and usually older men that has traveled abroad, made businesses and success and everything. We have them all in a network that we can connect to them and we can send them information, and they're all connected, so they can be representatives of Copenhagen in any city or anywhere in the world they are. We're doing the same now with international students that have been to Copenhagen for 3 months or 6 months. Collect them, do network activities, and put them together in groups where we can actually use them as a communication tool and as representatives of the city. So we're looking forward to doing that even more, and I think that's a way to move forward in a world of today.
Yeah. Rachel, anything from Glasgow? Any insider tips?
So this is really important, actually, because we know that what helps us sell in the experience of Glasgow is the students who are experiencing Glasgow. So that kind of positive word of mouth and having international students act as ambassadors for the city is something that we're looking at developing through a more formal program. So we have international student blogs on our study portals. We do kind of vlogs with them. We use them to help support our social media communications. We're also looking at how we ensure that they have the very best student experience whilst they're with us. So we've run student K-Lays throughout the year. So we bring international students from across all of the institutions for key events that are taking place across the city. And we're also looking at how we can collaborate around graduations as well. So having a big celebration of our international students at graduations across the city, which also helps us to tap into their families and friends and other visitors that will be in the city at that time. So I think it's really critical that you use your international students' views and voices to really translate and communicate out the experience that they're having. So in every single way that we can do that, we aim to, including using them as sounding boards. So we run focus groups and surveys with those students on a regular basis, so we can constantly look at what we can be improving and what we can be changing up in our communication and marketing strategies.
Thank you very much. Samuel, I mean, this was great, no? To say like the diversity of stories, but it also supports what you were saying, a growing understanding of the broadest impact of higher education and the connections with youth travel. Is there anything you would like to add, or maybe feed for future conversations?
Well, as I was listening to these stories and from our perspective, we probably talked to 50 to 60 city or country destinations that try to attract more students. I sort of see 3 stages of development. First is building awareness and strategy, and some cities are in this level only. The next level is building content or verbalizing the content. So blogs, forums, or we call it the tangible measurables. Like I was in Hawaii 2 months ago, and they have a great offer, but they don't speak the language of international students, so they cannot sell it. So they have content, but they are not in a position to speak the language of the audience. So first level, just awareness and strategy. Second, building the content, and third one is to go out and promote it. Very few destinations, city destinations, are in the last. Dozens are in the second, and now we're reaching quite numerous destinations that actually understood the benefit of international influx of international students and involved in this. And I just wish that there are more and more, because I think that increases the overall international mobility. that like we have the good stories here, or it can be converted in a good story like in Vienna. So,
thank you very much for that, those last words. Thank you very much for attending. As I said in the beginning, I think this is the beginning of a longer conversation. We will keep you posted. We have a wonderful conference in November in Vienna taking place, where this will also be a topic at the class of 2020. And if you want to be invited to that, I have a few flyers there. And if you want to talk to any of the panelists, please do so at the site, because we're clearing the stage for the next session. Thank you very much for being here, and see you soon.